Hey guys, you again with Committed. Today we have new location. Thank you for Creative States for hosting us. And we have very special and very interesting guest, Katrina Clokie. Katrina, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thanks.
Please meet Anton and Olga. And my first question is, have you ever been interviewed at 6 a.m. in the morning? How do you feel?
Yeah, it's pretty early in New Zealand. I have had my breakfast and my hot drink, and hopefully I'm going to stay awake and be coherent. So fingers crossed.
Okay, I will start with a provocative question because you need to completely wake up, and we need to not to fall sleeping. So you are author of the book Testing in DevOps. What is the main difference between testing in DevOps and testing itself?
Oh, that's a great question. So, what is the main difference? I mean,
Sorry.
testing's an activity. Testing's an activity, right? So it's going to be the actual things you do, like the things you think about, and the automated tests you code, like the actual activity is going to be potentially pretty similar. But I think the way you think about when you do those things and who you work with and how you're part of the team, those are sort of the things that change. So it's not so much specifically the test activity, although, so now that I'm saying that, there's some differences. Like if you're used to testing in a way that is very independent and documentation driven and potentially quite rigorous, like you disappear for 3 days and assess the quality of this thing and then turn up into your team with like your tablet of truth and be like, ta-da, this has been tested. Yeah, it's going to be different for you. But I think the DevOps shift for me is more about like the environment that you're in and how the team works and how testing is part of kind of everything.
Okay.
Okay. I've heard that some people say that DevOps is methodology. I heard that some people say that DevOps is way of thinking or some kind of culture, and some people say that it's only a new role in software development, like QA developers and DevOps. So, who is or what is DevOps from your point of view?
So for me, so I really like that infinity loop around DevOps. So the dev test cycle becoming like release, monitor, and feedback. And I think to achieve that, it's kind of a combination of some of the things you've talked about. Like you need to be a developer who's always thinking about what's happening in production and your customers and how you can use that feedback. But there are specific tools and techniques that are going to support you to do that. It's not enough to just be like, oh, I think about production. You actually need a way to go and examine that and get feedback from it and look at it. And similarly, if you work in an ops space, picking up some of the development tools for your day-to-day, so looking at like source control around your configuration for infrastructure or how you run pull request reviews for infrastructure change instead of just logging into prod and quickly fixing that one flag that you know needs to change. So it's a mixture of the things you've talked about, right? Like you need to sort of shift your thinking, but also you need some of those tools and techniques to support the change in thinking that you are making. Yeah.
So it looks like that that DevOps is like more. It's like more technical agile, right? So basically, to build the really effective agile team, you need the right people, right? But is it possible to build the DevOps culture without the right people?
Oof, that's a loaded question. So
That will wake you up.
the right people, yeah, I reckon. So, I mean, I've definitely encountered some teams with people who really struggled to shift their thinking away from testing being something very independent and something very rigorous. And their appetite for risk became out of sync with the rest of the business. So they wanted to like carefully examine every change, and the business was saying, actually, we'd like to go a bit faster, and it's okay if sometimes that means we have quality issues in production, as long as we've also got the tooling in production to detect those problems and quickly fix them. And so the tester is sort of there to serve the risk, to mitigate some of those risks for the business. And when the business risk appetite shifts, the tester also needs to change, right? So I think like the right person is probably not the word I would use, but I've definitely had people in the team where I'm like, oh, I don't know if you're ever going to really get this. And I think it's the same with like development and like operations roles. There'll be some people who are really attached to the way that they currently work, and it's really challenging to kind of shift. And it's not so much that they're not capable of doing whatever the new thing is. It's more that they don't like truly understand the why of or how things have changed around them. And that makes it really hard. Yeah. Is it possible to do without the right people? Like, yes, but probably badly.
It's interesting that maybe you know the case where the agile philosophy was in conflict with the DevOps philosophy. If you know this case, if you ever met this case, I would like to listen. No?
Tell me about it.
Oh, so you believe that the DevOps and agile, it goes smoothly together without any conflict?
I think so. So for me, DevOps, I think it's a slightly different. I actually think you can do DevOps without Agile. It's harder and it's slower, but I think you can. Like if you've got a waterfall team that only release like once every 3 months, you're never going to be a high performing DevOps team. But I feel like if you can get the other half of that feedback loop, like if you've got really strong production monitoring, you've got the operational feedback coming back in to inform like the next development cycle and your test cycle, like that's a good thing. I think waterfall is usually just drop it off a cliff into production and then go work on our next thing. But you know, so, and then agile, right? Like it's spinning around that loop faster. Like if you've got, I think it's much easier to come from a basis of agile, but I hadn't spotted any kind of friction between agile and DevOps. Like it's a slightly different, I find DevOps a little bit more prescriptive about like the what, how you would actually implement kind of that feedback cycle, whereas agile is sort of more principle and mindset driven, but I find them pretty in sync. Yeah.
Yes. So what I'm asking is that I know the case where the agile was so agile, so the DevOps pipeline, the continuous integration pipeline was changing so rapidly, so they didn't have actually the DevOps culture in it. They have just full agile, straightforward.
So they had everything flowing out really quickly, but nothing coming back in.
They were changing
interesting.
They were changing the release procedure lots of times due to some business requirements, and it was very fun to watch.
Cool. I think, yeah, like some of our pipelines evolve a lot, but we also still have like our monitoring dashboards and our logging that's giving us the feedback around the other side. So for me, it's more about making sure the loop stays closed. And I guess like if you picture that figure 8 and the outwards part of the 8 is going really fast, then you sort of need the back around part to speed up a bit, or you're going to end up with a whole lot of information sitting out in production that you don't know about. But yeah, that's funny. They're just piling out a whole bunch of stuff and not able to keep up. Yeah.
Look, you are an author of the book Testing in DevOps. I suppose that when DevOps actually became popular, nobody had a clue how to test in DevOps. It's quite similar with Agile. When Agile actually became popular, nobody had a clue how to test in Agile. Am I right?
Yeah, so Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory, I think, were the pioneers of kind of writing about testing in Agile. They've got a couple of great books. To be honest, this is a little bit before my time. So I think, yeah, you're right. Like, it was probably something really confronting and challenging for people and a bit different. And it's the same kind of thing, right? It's trying to write about trying to explain to people how things around you might shift and how you need to respond to that, I think is what both the Agile testing and my DevOps book are kind of about. Because as I said, like, the way you actually think about assessing a problem or finding a bug potentially doesn't change that much, but everything around you is changing so much that the way you think about your approach has to shift a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any ideas what new methodology come to the market? Nobody knows how to add testing to it, and some experts need to write a book.
What's the next book? So maybe like machine learning and AI type of stuff. I think I actually have a friend who's got a PhD in data science, and she was talking about how there's sort of a growing awareness about bias in algorithms and how the data sets can influence that bias. And the data scientists themselves are starting to talk more around like sample selection and where data comes from. But from a testing perspective, I haven't really seen, so Angie Jones wrote an article around this a few years ago, but there's not like a huge volume of material I've seen around like how do testers engage in machine learning earlier. We seem to be testing kind of the outcomes of those algorithms through a UI or an API, as opposed to like getting right up alongside the data scientists and understanding how they're sampling, what trade-offs they're making, like how that's actually working. So I am not going to write this book, but that might be kind of the next book that I kind of see in this space, because that field is definitely exploding. Like our ability to intelligently make decisions from large sets of data, like we've been collecting terabytes of stuff for a while. So I think that's going to become really prevalent, even more so than now. And then knowing what to test with that will be a big change.
Okay, and probably the last question about the book. I know that you are currently interested in technical leadership. Should we expect something like a testing in leadership or testing in technical leadership book from you? Or it's obvious thing and everybody knows how to test being a leader? What do you think?
I don't think you can expect that book. No, I don't want you to hold your breath about that one. So I am in a technical leadership role now. I manage a function of DevOps, Dev and QA staff, and also a product manager and kind of a department accountability as well. But I find, it's really interesting how people in the testing community perceive that shift, because I sort of worked through like testing leadership, engineering leadership, and then like senior management of engineering. And so where I am now, I definitely use a lot of skills from when I was a tester, but it's also quite far away from testing. So I'm not sure how many people would be that interested in a book about testing in the context of the role that I have now. And also, I don't want to sit down and write another book.
Okay, thanks.
I also have a little question regarding the leadership. So, do you believe that technical leadership is something different than the social leadership, or what is the difference between those? How do you behave? How should you behave differently in technical leadership to be the great leader?
That's an awesome question. And also a hard question. So how do I think they're different? They're definitely different skill sets, and you can be really good at one or other and be successful in a specific type of role. So if I'm thinking about like my lead developers, I need them to be strong technical leaders because they are guiding our technical designs. They are like an expert opinion in our code review process. They're very close to implementation of the solution, and their leadership role is specifically about that technical leadership. So I need them to be good at it. But it's also really helpful if they have some social leadership skills. Not all of them do, though. So being collaborative and empathetic communicators, being organized, being able to be flexible when things change. Like there's a bunch of kind of core skills or social skills, as you called them, where it improves your ability to achieve an outcome. But that doesn't mean you can't achieve that outcome without them, I think, in a technical leadership role. If I look at the role I'm in, I find that the social becomes more important than the technical because of the nature of where I am in the organization. So for me to successfully navigate conversations with like senior stakeholders, executive management, plus also my direct reports in my wider department, I need a pretty high level of collaboration, communication, organization, like that type of skill set. And my understanding of the code is zero in a lot of cases, and also doesn't matter that it's zero. But I do benefit from having a technical background where I understand what's going on in the teams, because that's sort of the content of the conversations that I'm having across the business. So I need to be able to represent their concerns and their achievements accurately. But it's sort of more the social skills that become more important.
So it's like a phenomena because a person who might not be the big expert in everything, there are lots of people around this person who have very deep knowledge in some specific areas, but still this person in the middle is the leader, and everybody is listening to him. This is a very interesting phenomena. And do you know the secret? Can you tell?
I do not know the secret. Can you tell me the secret?
Later, maybe.
Okay, it's so secret we can't talk about it. Yeah, I see the same. I see the same thing, and that's okay when the person who's still the leader uses their powers for good. I see occasionally people like that use their powers for evil and start to kind of destroy the team because they don't have the knowledge, but everyone's still going to follow them anyway. And instead of recognizing that and collaborating with others and getting a good outcome, they get a little bit like power heavy and start making decisions that actually they don't have the understanding to make. And then we end up in a bit of a troublesome spot. But yeah, I've definitely seen that phenomena happen.
Cool. Thank you.
Kim, but maybe you will share with us how did you get your first leadership job and what helped you to succeed in this area?
Yeah. So my first leadership roles were mostly through volunteering. So I found it really difficult to get opportunities to go into leadership within tech, especially in testing. Like I think I bounced earlier in my career between development and like infrastructure engineering and testing. And it was from testing that I wanted to go into leadership role. And I think testing is often perceived as being kind of a lower role in some of the New Zealand organizations, at least. And so there was a bit of work to kind of convince people that I was capable of doing leadership roles. So I did a bit of volunteering where I was leading like after school programs or working in the community on projects. And I also moved into a consulting firm. So I think having testing experience, but it being in a consulting context really helped to improve like some of my social leadership skills around like engaging with customers and planning out my time and reporting on things in a way that people cared about. And that really improved like my leadership skills for when I went for some of those leadership roles. My first leadership role was in that consulting firm, and I picked up two things at once. One was leading the testing practice, so that was more like the technical leadership role. And then I also picked up what was called a circle lead, and that was people leadership. So I had 7 direct reports, and I was responsible for kind of their health and well-being and their personal development. And so that was quite challenging because it was 2 quite different roles and different skill sets, but also it was really cool because I got to develop both those things in parallel.
Katrina, you've been a tester for a while, and at some point in time, I mentioned that you just stopped blogging about testing, stopped thinking about testing, and stopped to appear on the conferences and talk about testing. It's not the rare case, and I know several people that just stop, I would say, testing and trying to forget this, like. So
like a nightmare.
Yes, like a nightmare. My question is, why you decided to leave software tester profession? What was the main reason? I expect the quite honest
this
answer.
This question is hilarious. So I don't know. So I can talk about why I decided to stop blogging. So at that point, I wasn't really in a testing role anymore. So it was starting to feel like the content I was writing about was becoming further and further removed from something of value to a tester in a team. And part of why I used to write the blog, initially it was for me to write down stuff. I have a terrible memory. And because I was consulting when I started the blog, I needed somewhere I could put stuff that I could find it when I switched client site. And so I would actually look up my own blog when I went to a new client to figure out how to do the thing I did at the previous client, because obviously I wouldn't have access to like their Wikipedia or what's it called, Wiki or Confluence kind of site. And then when I was in a test management role, the blog became a way for me to write down things that I wanted to tell my team. So it was a really good way of like focusing my thinking and capturing some stuff I needed them to know about. But then I moved into roles where my remit was a little bit wider and the scope of what I was doing was shifting, and I was sort of in that engineering management space. And I felt like I was divorcing from kind of the purpose of the blog because my role had changed so far. And so I just thought, you know what, I'm going to stop. And I did. But then I think that made me realize that actually I needed to go and find conferences and Twitter networks and people who were active around engineering leadership and engineering management, because that was the community that I'd become part of, and kind of the skills and the material and the content and the conversations that I wanted to be in. So it wasn't so much like a active choice to leave testing. It was more like where I was had shifted so much that I made an active choice to join a different community, and that I couldn't do both. Like I just didn't have time to stay as involved as I was in the testing community and also immerse myself in this other area. So, and it's been, like I said, it's been really interesting because there have been a few people who are like, where have you gone? Come back, write a blog, do something. And I'm like, oh, there's only kind of so many hours in the day. So you can get me at like 6 a.m. in the morning. But other than this, I kind of am really busy with other things. Yeah.
Thank you for the honest answer. But let's try to
You're welcome.
look from a little bit different point of view. It was your
Sure.
story. Thank you. What do you think? Why actually people are leaving testing? I know a lot of people that
Other
left.
people?
Yes, they left testing and for I would say become developers and DevOps, things like that. But unfortunately, I know very few cases when people switch it from development to testing.
So there's two answers in New Zealand: money and kind of status, and then maybe three: learning. Those are kind of the reasons I hear. So as I kind of said, like testing in my country is still in some organizations seen as kind of a lower tier of position than a dev or a DevOps person. So if I want more money, I'm going to switch role. Status. So in the team and in those organizations, and I'm gonna say now, like, this is not true at my organization, and the banding for testers and devs is the same, but there are definitely organizations where that's not true, right? So status, if I'm getting disrespected at work and I can see that if I was a dev that would not be true, that's a pretty easy decision, even if the money's the same. Like if my work environment and the people relationships are going to be easier and better, sure, I'm going to take that job. And then the other is probably learning. So for people where I think because test automation has such a huge push behind it, testing can be a way to learn a lot of coding practice and to get people really excited about learning to code. And if they've developed some of those skills by being a tester, sometimes that shift is because they really enjoy that aspect of their role and they want a role where that's their full-time role, is just like cutting code and creating stuff as opposed to kind of investigating and figuring out what's going on. So and I think all those reasons are valid, and go for it. Like there's always going to be people who want to come into testing as well, and it's sort of, I think that kind of makes it interesting because you're sort of having to re-educate the whole testing industry on kind of a pretty regular cycle. Like it's pretty high churn sort of community.
Thanks, a pretty sad story, but unfortunately true.
Yes.
Yeah. Is it sad? I don't know. People who make more money and feel happier and get to learn things, those are happy stories, Victor. It's okay.
It's really interesting question. Money and happiness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
More
interesting.
money, more happiness.
Not always. I mean,
Not always.
yes.
Yes.
Interesting. How do you think why testing or testing profession usually is the lowest status in this hierarchy? I've been asking many people about this, and everybody have different opinion about this. What's your opinion?
Mm-hmm. My opinion is testing has an outcome that's hard to see. And if you do it well, nobody knows you were there. So when I'm a dev, I'm creating. When I'm a tester, I'm kind of interrogating and trying to pick risks and problems. Like it's a different kind of mindset. But if I'm creating something, right, like I can show you it at the end. Like, here is my thing I developed. If I'm interrogating something, it's very hard to see that activity happen. And at the end of it, if I've done my job well, nothing appears to be different. Like the thing the developer showed you like 2 weeks before I started this, it looks identical, but now it's better. Like magic. And so I think testers who have what we'd call mana, like they've got the respect and people look to them, they're really good at communicating what their interrogation activities actually are and how they're delivering value. And that's a really hard thing to do. Like I don't see many testers who can do that well. And so a lot of the time it becomes something that people sort of take for granted and don't entirely understand the benefit of. Like they sort of see it as a necessary evil. And so it's kind of frustrating. It's like, I don't know, when you have to go to the doctor to get your regular like blood test or vaccination, you know you have to, but it's kind of annoying. And then you don't really see anything from it. Like there's pain and inconvenience, and then like they say it's good, and you're like, okay, cool. And I like it's sort of the same kind of thing. Like, yeah.
So do I correctly understand that if a test engineer would like to get a higher status, this engineer should make his or her work visible, right? So everybody around saw the outcome of his efforts and somehow show that his job does better, right?
I think so. Like it's hard, to your point before around like technical leadership versus social leadership. I sort of think social leadership becomes a little bit more important if you want to become a higher or more respected tester, because often people either overlook or kind of trivialize the technical aspects of the role. And so you need to be really good at some of that like self-promotion and communication aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting that I know lots of people who are saying that, okay, I personally do believe that if a person, the more person, let's say, let's put it this way, the more person is technical person, the more level of respect it has, right? So, but you're saying that is not kind of the point.
Well, I guess I'm saying in some organizations that wouldn't be visible. It depends on how the testers are working with others, right? Like if I'm really embedded in a cross-functional team of developers who see my code, like their pull request reviews include test automation, and they actually understand the code I'm writing and what it covers and have visibility of it, that does a lot of the work for me, right? Like the code becomes the way I talk about what I'm
Fair
doing.
enough.
Yeah, but I think if you're not in that situation, how do you get that same visibility? It's through you, right? Like your own skill. Yeah.
But don't you think that in some time DevOps will have the same story that testers now do? Because you told a very important point that nobody see what tester does. Because developer comes and tells, here, I've done that. And tester can do this. But on the other hand, DevOps, he's a technical person, but he also can come and tell, look, I did that, because his outcome is also not visible. So now DevOps are really popular, and everyone want to have them because nobody knows what is it. But okay, it's popular thing, I want it too. But in a few years, people will see that there is no outcome and DevOps will be abandoned.
Yeah, I think I don't think that's quite true, but I really like the question. So I kind of find DevOps people showing a lot about their pipelines and their monitoring dashboards or like their observability dashboards. So they do have output and those are generally the things they make visible to show how they're adding value. Like, and it's interesting because those things in isolation kind of mean nothing. Like they need stuff to deploy and they need a platform to monitor and a team to provide that feedback to. Like they're responsible for piping almost that workflow. But their output is still something like tangible and visible a lot of the time. And so they can point at it and say, this is what I've done. And like, here's how people are using it. And this is why it's valuable to the organization. And I think for testing, it can be a really challenging thing. If you've got an automated test suite and you can point to where it's running and it's always got a green tick, like, yeah, maybe. But yeah,
I can point the issue I found, for example.
Yeah, there we go. And but I think so. If I'm thinking about the loop, if the issue you found has been fixed, some of the time it's not visible still, right? Like it was like you found it, you wrote it up, the dev fixed it, it's gone into the code. And then if you're like at a management layer, that sort of disappears a little bit. Like they don't see that happen. And I'd know. And I'm like way 4 or 5 up from like that person, right? So, and I'd know because we wouldn't have any visibility of what was happening in our production platform. A bunch of our alerts go off when our monitoring stops because we want to fix our monitoring. Like it would be, they've sort of created something that is part of that cycle in a way that if their output was absent or broken, it'd be really visible to the business. Yeah. But yeah, that's an interesting question. Will DevOps disappear? I mean, maybe. Who knows?
Katrina, you probably know that a lot of people talking about Agile, a lot of people talking about DevOps, a lot of people currently talking about the AI. It's like a buzzword. At the same time, I would say when a lot of people talking and now talking about Agile, when it comes to explain what actually Agile you have, in most cases they have 2 simple things. We have the daily sync-ups and we have no documentation.
Yay!
Yeah, so basically it's like a agile or fragile, I don't know, probably agile.
Yeah.
I suppose that it's quite the same about the DevOps. It looks great when it comes to such things, but give me an honest answer. Have you ever heard or saw the company with a real working DevOps? And how many such companies you saw?
Yeah. So the company I'm part of now, we do, but it's not mature. So if I look at Accelerate and the research that Nicole Forsgren and others executed around DevOps, they sort of identified some key metrics and also what those metrics look like in high-performing DevOps companies. And in the organization I'm part of, we're measuring against those things. But if we look at the results of our measurements, we're not at the kind of elite status. And that's where we aspire to get to, but we're not there yet. But I'd say we have that figure 8 going on. Like we have the feedback cycles and the deployment pipelines, the observability. It's just a little bit slower and a bit like stop-starty. And that's what our metrics kind of show, that it's not as rapid and iterative and smooth as it becomes when you're really nailing that kind of culture. Do I see organizations who say they're doing DevOps and are not doing DevOps? Like 1,000% yes. And usually that's someone has made a pipeline in Jenkins and called it DevOps, and then they're done. So, yeah, yep.
And also, I think sometimes having a DevOps, it's having on board one DevOps engineer. When we have
Yeah,
DevOps,
that's true.
yes, yes.
We have a DevOps because that guy, we hired that guy and he's going to do DevOps for us, or we hired that woman and she's going to create something for us. So therefore we are DevOps now. Yeah, absolutely.
Can we say that a lot of managers consider DevOps something like a silver bullet?
So yes, but I think it is based on research that kind of supports that, so I really find it challenging at testing conferences sometimes listening to presentations about test automation tools and some of the claims they make about the impact of those tools and what's going to happen if you buy this tool.
Yes.
Because it's pretty, it's definitely marketed as a silver bullet and it's not. What I kind of like about the way managers talk about DevOps is very driven and informed by that research and accelerate, at least in New Zealand. And because that is research, like it's not written by someone who's trying to sell you a thing, and because it's kind of academic in nature, peer-reviewed, and it has some really strong data around if you do this, here's the outcome you can expect. Like it's sort of seen as a silver bullet, but actually if you're trying to do it well, you have to do a bunch of really good things. Like it's not like one of those ones where a manager goes to a conference, sees some ridiculous claims from a vendor, buys a tool, drops it into a team and is like, do this, and then walks away. Like you can't really do DevOps that way unless you go get a person. True. But for the people who are actually engaged in kind of the material, I think it is seen as a silver bullet, but it's also a bullet that you kind of have to implement carefully and with thought, and it's a bit more reasoned. Yeah.
Actually, thanks. I completely agree with you. I also think that we can see the magic of DevOps, test automation, and Agile only on the conferences. It's like the place where all this magic live and work together. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. So I'd like to put another question here. It's about no ops approach or philosophy. Have you heard about it? And do you agree with this? If yes, or if no, why?
So let me check first. I haven't heard of this, but is no ops, are they talking about the ops part of the process being owned by the delivery or development team? Is that
yes?
in essence what they say?
It means like each developer have its own CI pipeline, and each developer owns this too, so they don't have to separate. Okay. Yes, correct.
Cool. I mean, I think that is a possible outcome of really aggressively adopting DevOps, but I wouldn't have branded it as no ops, and I find it really interesting that that's how it's become known, because it's like saying no dev as meaning like we're going to adopt ops tools or dev tools in our ops, right? Like it's quite a aggressive naming convention. Do I agree with it? Yeah, for some things I do. And I agree with it in the sense that the devs get a much better understanding of what goes into getting code out and the production health. But I'd also say that aside from simple domains or smaller applications, I'm not sure that it would be viable because the skill set to kind of manage the pipelining and monitoring and alerting tools that's quite a large skill set. And I know in my organization, finding people who know how to do all of that, like to create and manage infrastructure as code, to be like literate in cloud consoles and kind of that management of the infrastructure when it's running, to find people who know how to run all our build tools and configure that config, and also our monitoring dashboards and alerting and giving us sensible data. Like that is a massive skill set, let alone, oh yeah, also you need to write all of the application code and make sure that you're part of testing it and understand the business requirements. Like you're starting to come to a point where it's hard to resource a team if you need people who know the whole lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely
But
agree
if
with
you've
you.
got like tiny web app or something, go for it. No
Yeah,
ops.
I mean, I don't believe in this no ops thing too, just because I do believe that like the most common rule is about like 10K hours, means that if you want to become an expert in something, you need to spend the 10K hours on it, and only then you'll be the expert. So I honestly I don't believe in full stack developers because of this reason. Like if you see the person with like saying like 10 years of experience and he knows everything, it looks to me like what the person could be an expert only in a couple areas, right? So basically, same thing I guess in this no ops approach.
You just hurt all full stack developers and now they will hate you.
Maybe, but okay, please hate me from now on.
I do, like, I kind of agree with you, but I'd also say a lot of companies who look for full stack devs are doing that because they have specialists. So they need some people to be the glue. Like they need that shallow skill in a bunch of different areas to kind of stick everything together. And then you hire like the specialists in the part of the stack where you need the deep knowledge. So like, yeah, I totally agree. That's, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it's a job more for the architects, right? Who just does the high level mapping, right? And then the people does the job in the local areas they're experts in. Okay, I get one more question regarding leadership. It's more like regarding the people who are just becoming the leaders, who are just starting to lead the teams, and usually. I do believe the most scary thing in leadership is the fear of making some mistakes. So what would you recommend to the people who are starting doing leadership in terms of how to deal with this fear, how to handle your personal mistakes, and how to not afraid to make those mistakes and telling about those to the people who they're leading with?
Yeah, great question.
I would also add to take responsibility
For those failures, yeah. So this is really hard when you're first in a leadership role, especially if you are leading a team that you haven't hired or you don't have a relationship with. Like if you arrive into that role of an existing team and people you don't know, like that's intimidating, because the way I think you fail kind of successfully is by telling people that it's going to happen, asking them to give you feedback about it, and visibly working through how you're going to adapt your approach for next time. So I've just recently picked up a new part of the team where I work, and I ran a leadership meeting where I said, like, these are my ideas. I don't think these are the right ideas. They're just the ideas I have right now. And I need you to help me to make these better. And some of this we might get wrong. And as long as we're all still talking to each other and giving each other feedback, we can adapt quickly and kind of make these things work. But that's a conversation that's really tricky if you are a brand new leader. and especially with people you don't know. So my advice would be first focus on kind of building the relationships with the people who you're leading, get to know them, get to understand the environment and the team. And in that kind of knowledge gathering phase, hopefully it's relatively hard to fail spectacularly. And then you're going to have to start doing some stuff where the stakes are a little bit higher. And I think if you're doing that in a way where you acknowledge that it might not be the right thing, but that you want to try it, set up forums for people to tell you what is and isn't working. So it might be like a team retro, it might be your one-on-ones with people, and like actively seek feedback and try not to do it in a way that's like a loaded question. Like, oh, the thing I introduced last week, that was great, right? It's like, yeah, great. So, try and ask like, what's one thing that would make that better? Or what's one thing you've seen be challenging about the way I've been operating? So kind of seeking it out, and then where things do go wrong, kind of fronting up to it and talking to people about it.
But also, it's sometimes very difficult to understand the real feedback because, our culture usually makes us to be nice with each other, right? We're saying to each other like good, nice messages, nice feedbacks, but sometimes it's very hard to understand if it's the real feedback or it's just a nice feedback. How do you know where is truth?
That's an awesome question too. So I'm always connected to both channels. So if you imagine like radio station frequencies, there's the frequency where it's like the open communication and what you're hearing in like team meetings, public forums, face to face. And then there's the frequency where there's a whole bunch of like Slack channels or IMs or emails where there's like a hidden layer of feedback, and I like to try and switch frequencies. So you sort of need to have enough people who are part of this radio station, like where you get the good public feedback, who are going to be able to tell you about what's happening on the other station and trying to flush out like what's going on. And then sometimes actually going over and directly talking to people and being like, hey, I heard you might have some feedback around X. Like, can you tell me? I'm really eager to understand what you actually think about this because I've heard it's not, what you're telling me. So trying to stay tuned into that. The other thing I look for is sometimes on that like public frequency, you can tell that it's not genuine. So people's body language or their tone or their like physical like discomfort about lying to you and saying, oh yeah, everything's really fine. Like I'm enjoying this, what you're doing. It's really good. And you can tell, right, that they think this is the worst idea ever and also they hate it. And so, yeah, I think it's staying tuned into what's happening behind the scenes and being really mindful of what people say with their words versus what they're kind of telling you by how they say it and what they're doing. Yeah.
Katrina, when you're starting some new initiative or probably trying to enforce something new in the project or in the company organization, how can you tell actually it's working or not, or working good, bad, or even harmful?
Yeah.
I think every manager doing such things.
Absolutely. I'm doing this right now. How can I tell? So we have a regular measurement around like our delivery health and performance, our compliance to what we call our path to production standards. So like how we go about releasing and monitoring our software. We take team health checks, kind of like Spotify model, the traffic light kind of format against some indicators around team. We look at Office Vibe, which is like a enterprise tool for capturing feedback and kind of environment health kind of measures. So we have a full variety of like that type of measure to look at as we're making change. But the biggest thing is what I just talked about around staying engaged with the team and asking them directly. So probably 2 or 3 weeks ago now, we presented a big piece of like change and vision to the area that I'm leading. And I set up 4 different 1-hour feedback sessions where the team could opt in and come and talk to me and ask questions and find out kind of why we were doing this, what was going, like, you know, the opportunity to sort of say like, what are you thinking? This is terrible. Or I really like this bit, but here's where I think you might have trouble and this is why. So those sessions were really valuable. We wrote up kind of FAQs, and some people preferred like reading through those answers and giving us like written feedback rather than having a conversation. And then I'm always staying tuned to that back channel to find out kind of what's going on that I'm not hearing about directly, and trying to flush out some of that. So I think it's a mixture of looking at your data, so across both qualitative and quantitative measures around like delivery and also team, looking like giving the team the opportunity to engage and give you feedback directly, and also kind of tracking what's happening behind the scenes, and how you can tap into that and figure out like where you're going right or wrong and how you might adapt.
I heard an expert opinion, actually I suppose this is an expert opinion, that the one thing, and actually the only one thing you know to enforce something in the company, it's just the support of the management. What do you think?
I'd probably disagree with that expert. I feel like it's not the only thing. If my job was that easy, it would be really nice. Like if I could just support things and then they would happen, that'd be pretty cool. But I think there's a lot of, I think it's really important facet of how you make change, but I think there's a bunch of other stuff that you need. It's not enough for just to me to say, here's the thing I want to happen, go. Like you sort of need to have the rationale, the education, the feedback opportunities, the planning, like how you're going to engage people and get them excited about it. Like it's a, there's quite a bit of other stuff.
Okay, and probably the last question about the organization. I think that mostly DevOps and Agile changes, it's about the culture. What do you think? How difficult actually to change the culture?
Very. It's very difficult. And I think in tech, a lot of the time, the culture change is driven by process and tool change, as opposed to like directly talking about culture. One of my colleagues actually approaches cultural change culture first. And it's been really interesting to watch her because I don't see this much in tech. And she's really good at like getting people to talk about what they value and identifying principles that they want to strive to as people, and kind of checking in with people as to how they're acting against those principles. And I can see that that approach is great and also makes technical people deeply uncomfortable because it's purely focused on like them as people and the values they demonstrate through their behavior. Personally, I find it a little bit easier and less confronting to try and shift culture through the tech and the process and approach that we're following. So like to my example earlier around the tester who's used to getting a few days to kind of go in isolation, examine something, and then come back and give you an answer. If I want to shift the culture of that team, it's going to be through changing their approach and their processes around test. And that's slowly going to shift the way that people think about testing and how they engage with testing. So it's culture change that's driven through specific kind of constraints rather than directly saying to someone, here are some things we value, like we'd like you to work collaboratively, we'd like you to work in a way that we get rapid feedback, because sometimes people sort of nod along to that culture stuff but don't actually associate it to actions that they're taking that are kind of in conflict with those statements. Yeah.
Thanks.
Changes are always pressure for the team, for the people who are put into the changes. So my question is, how do you reduce this pressure and the stress level in your teams?
Yeah, this is also a great question, and it's really hard to do. So I would say I don't, but I'm conscious of how much pressure I'm creating. So I'd be trying to even out kind of when I'm asking things to shift so that the cognitive load of learning about a change and figuring out how to do it is sort of spread out. Like, I'm not going to ask you to do everything here. I'm going to try and flatten that so that it's small changes iteratively. We're getting feedback and we're kind of adapting it. But that's also still going to create kind of a constant stream of stress and pressure for some people. How am I managing that? Through the people leaders of those people. So we look at kind of the well-being indicators through our reporting, but also I'd be asking people in one-on-ones, like, who in the team should I be checking in with? Do you have any well-being concerns in the team? How can I support you to support that person, basically? Like, what do we need to do? Do we need to shift their team? Do we need to add a person to buddy with them? Do we need to send them on a training course to kind of help them understand what we're asking of them a little bit more? Like, what are some of the options that we have? Yeah.
Thank you.
Katrina, I have one more challenging question for you. But before that, I'd like to remind everybody that we have a Slido, so we can you can put your questions who are listening this interview. You gotta put your questions to Katrina here in Slido, so Katrina could answer them. And my question is, imagine the situation that you, for example, working with a group of people for years, drinking from one can, having fun together, everything. But at some point you get promoted and you will need to manage and lead the people you were on the same level with them before, and now everything's changed. How would you behave in this way, or what approaches would you use, to hold friendship with them, but still to play your new position effectively?
Oh, that is a tough question, and one I haven't actually. I'm trying to think. Probably when I was in the test consultancy is the closest I've come to this experience, where I was sort of promoted into a role that meant I had to shift from a peer to like a leader. I think so. There's a few thoughts bouncing around in my head on this. So I think prioritizing maintaining the friendships above other things that you'll need to do as a leader is probably a mistake, which isn't to say that the friendships aren't important and something you should be trying to maintain, but I think prioritizing them above, like making hard decisions or introducing change that some people might not like, or directly addressing like behavior that you think is detrimental to the team, or any number of other kind of challenging things that you need to do as a leader. If you shy away from doing those things to maintain the friendships, you're probably going to lose the respect of some of the people who were your friends because they can see the same needs, right? Like acting first as a leader, I think, is part of how you maintain those good friendships, because people value that you're prepared to take on the responsibilities of the role that you've gone into. So in the team that I lead now, we have a Friday afternoon, an hour every Friday afternoon, where there's a meeting with no agenda, which is really challenging for me. I really like to understand like structure and what's going to happen here and what's the purpose of this. And it's one of those meetings where actually there's kind of no purpose on paper, but the purpose is that maintenance of relationship. So it's very informal. We sort of talk about how people are feeling about the week, what's been going on, what's coming up in their weekend. And so this is a meeting with me and all my direct reports. So there's 6 or 7 of us in the room. And that's a way of kind of showing people you're a human, which sometimes can be hard if you're promoted into a role where you used to be with everyone and now you're one up. It's like, yeah, I'm still like a normal person, even though I am now a manager, and being part of some of those really informal conversations and still kind of maintaining relationships with people, but not at the expense of doing the things that are hard about being a leader. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Katrina, we are talking a lot about the changes, about culture, about enforcement of different things into the project and into organization. All of us know that not all people are ready to accept the changes. And all of us know that not all people are even could change. But in the same time, these people remains good expert, nice persons. So it's a really important question when we would like to change, for example, enforce the agile, but not everybody could be agile. But what do you think? How we can manage with this about except obvious decision?
Yeah. So this is a good question. I feel like in some cases, part of the role of the leader is to help people understand how they are not meeting expectation and reiterating that the expectation isn't going to change, and having an honest conversation around like, are you enjoying being in a role where you aren't able to meet the expectation of the role, and how can I support you to find a role that will fit for you? So there's definitely an aspect of like, some of the time people are going to leave, and it will be through a conversation where you're helping them to recognize what you see. There will be people who will surprise you, and when you start having those conversations, they realize how they're being perceived and will actually change. I've definitely hit that before, where everyone was talking about the person, but no one had actually talked to them and sat them down and sort of said, hey, here's what we're expecting to happen. Here's some of the things I observe you doing. Here's what the gap is between what we need and what you're doing. Can you talk to me a bit about how I can support you to make this shift? And being really specific with people about their own behavior and what we need was enough to kind of give them a little bit of a push in the right direction. I've also had people where I've been implementing change and I thought, there's no way this guy will change. Like, no way. And then they've really surprised me and been one of the first people to sort of go, oh, okay, and pick things up and try and learn proactively and become almost a champion of what we're trying to achieve. So I think it can be really hard to pick and sometimes your assumptions are wrong. But if you do have challenges with individuals, having an open conversation with them to give them the opportunity to change their behavior, or supporting them to go and find like an alternative role somewhere where they can be successful.
Actually, as I understand, basically the main idea is to give the person a reason to change, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's interesting. We have one question on Slido that I'll read, and you can respond if you want. So, what should be the main priorities for software tester in terms of professional development in DevOps area?
Era,
Era?
not
Oh,
area.
okay, era, yeah.
It's important.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
So
DevOps era.
what should be the main tools for development, for testing, for developing as a tester in a DevOps era? Was that the question?
What should be the main priorities for a software tester in terms of professional development in DevOps era?
Okay, cool. So part of me kind of hates starting here, but if you don't know how to code, you should learn some kind of coding language, because I think a higher degree of technical literacy is important to understand some of the concepts around DevOps and the way that code moves and the way that infrastructure is provisioned and the way we get feedback, like understanding how that is implemented, not to a deep level, but you need to sort of understand enough that you can leverage it in your testing. So that I think is really important. Understanding how you can use automated infrastructure as your own test environment. So building up some skills around containers and a cloud-based environment infrastructure, like knowing how to spin up and down your own local environment. I think that's really important. Like if you've got all that tooling available and you're still trying to test against static environments, that's a missed opportunity. Understanding pipelines and how your tests can be optimized for those. So I see people kind of creating these massive UI automation suites or these massive test suites for APIs, and actually they don't, they're not structured to serve pipelines that require fast feedback loops. So learning more about how your assets are going to be run and the types of reporting and logging that people receive when something goes wrong. Because if you're running it through an IDE and your tests are usually executing through a pipeline, like when something fails, you've got quite a different set of data to debug the issue. So understanding more about like the pipelining, how your tests are going to execute and how they report and log, like all of that learning is really useful. And then probably like the monitoring and observability space. So learning more about what monitoring your team has in production, what those and what it's telling you, because that's going to inform your testing. Like if there's a lot of activity and errors in a part of the application that you don't normally interrogate that much, there's potentially a gap in kind of your understanding of how the software is used and where the risk is versus what is actually going on. And if you're lucky enough to have observability tooling where you can actually go kind of exploring and find out stuff that might not be actively monitored, that's a useful way to waste half a day and go kind of have a look around and learn a bit more in that space as well, again, to kind of inform your test coverage. So I think my steer for testers, and I'm kind of assuming they want to gain professional development skills in testing, has been the basis of kind of this answer. But there's a lot of opportunity for you to learn skills from kind of further around that DevOps pipeline that will influence your own effectiveness and the way that you operate within the team. Yeah.
Thank you. And may I ask the question about currently you're on the higher mountains in your area, you're a known person, and could you tell about your dreams in a professional way? I mean, what position would you like to take, or what job would you like to get, or what would you like to do? Because currently it seems far, you're on the top of the world, but there are, I'm sure there are the things higher.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an interesting one. So I have been talking with my manager about this a little bit, and I was saying to him, the more senior I become, the less convinced I am that I want to become more senior. So what I mean by that is I think in like a frontline management role, you've got really strong contact with the team and what they deliver. And the further you go in leadership, the more you start working on the organization itself and like the process and practices and like the networking between different departments, as opposed to like what the organization does. So I have very little to do with creating beautiful accounting software, which is what my company does, because of how high I've gone. I also kind of observed that between the layer I am at now and the next up, which is sort of more executive leadership, the ability to have a good work-life balance starts to become really hard. So there's some expectations about being a leader at a particular level in a global organization that actually, if someone in the UK needs to book me for a meeting at 4 a.m., sometimes I'm going to have to get up for that. And if someone in the US needs me to be online at 10 p.m., sometimes I'm going to have to do that. And then suddenly your day is like, I can't even do the maths of that. It's like a 20-hour day. So I don't know if that's a trade-off I want to take, because I like having healthy work-life balance. And I think I'm also right at the edge of how far away from the teams I want to be getting. Like I enjoy working with the teams and understanding what's happening there and being part of that. And I think the further up you go, the further away from that you become. But in terms of dreams, I guess it would be going into kind of higher leadership roles. But as I said, I have some doubts about whether that's going to be the right decision for me. So watch this space.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Cool.
One more question about the future. What kind of skills you expect to be demanded in the nearest future?
From testing or just in general?
I would say in software development at all. In the past, the most demanded skills was, I would say, technical. Nowadays we have trend for soft skills. What do you think we will see in the future, in the nearest future, I would say?
So this one's kind of interesting for me because I've been a hiring manager for a few years and I don't think my priorities have changed much overall. But when I'm hiring for specific roles, sometimes my priorities are quite different. So sometimes you need people with deep technical knowledge in a specific area because either you've lost someone who had that knowledge or your company is investing in a new area and you need to bring in people who have expert knowledge in that tool set specifically to support you to implement and make that change. But to my point earlier around like technical leadership and social leadership, sometimes if you're prioritizing technical, and those people aren't good social leaders, you need to hire for the softer skill some of the time. So I might need to hire some developers who are proficient in technology that we don't use, or might be new developers like graduates from university, who I prioritize hiring because they have really strong communication, collaboration, learning, growth, like that type of view of the world. I need those people to kind of connect the teams together and help the delivery function correctly. So I can't see the approach for me shifting that much. Like the specifics I'm prioritizing each time I hire are going to vary slightly depending on what the gap is that I'm trying to fill. I see like technology is always going to keep shifting. So what am I going to prioritize in 5 years? Probably whatever the shiny things are in 5 years. Potentially there'll be more recruitment around machine learning and AI, like we talked about a little bit earlier. Yeah, other than that, I'm not going to speculate.
Okay, thanks. I remember that we have a hard deadline, so probably we should move to the questions in Slido, and also we have a question from our guest in studio. So the question from Slido: is test orchestration just another industry buzzword? Please, up to a 1 minute answer. Blitz.
Sorry, was that test orchestration?
Is test orchestration just another industry buzzword?
You're saying test orchestration?
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't know what that is. What's test orchestration?
So let's say it's industry buzzword. Yes.
Looks like it's not.
Looks like it's not.
I just Googled Android Test Orchestrator collects JUnit tests at the beginning of your suite. Oh, so it's like an orchestrator is a mechanism for sequencing and scheduling your automated tests.
That's right.
It's a buzzword because I've never heard of it, but
Yes.
but it's not. That's like a useful piece of functionality, right? Like you need a tool that's going to run your tests. I can see actually, I had a former colleague who's done some work in this area, which is pretty cool. He home rolled a thing, which now I'm going to call an orchestrator, which would look at previous test runs and learn about which tests in the suite took the longest to run. And then when we set up our parallel threaded runs for the next test execution, it would dynamically allocate the tests out to the different threads so that we'd always get feedback in the fastest way possible. So if you're talking about orchestration that does something like that, that's super useful because it means people can optimize tests and kind of inflate the runtime of tests as the software changes, but the orchestrator will keep the test suite optimized as best as possible for like the overall feedback time. If it's that, then not a buzzword, other than I didn't know what it was, not a buzzword, and is actually something useful.
Okay.
I have one more question from Slido. How do you motivate your teams, your developers, your testers, your DevOps to be more engaged?
1 minute, please.
1 minute. So
Yes.
I motivate them to be engaged by keeping them involved. So I think the biggest thing that's demotivating is when change appears out of nowhere and you're like, why are we doing this? How did this decision come to be? And then no one cares if I am invested in this or not. Like that's a super demotivating situation to be in. I want to create a team environment where people have autonomy, mastery, and purpose, like Daniel Pink can drive. So motivation for me is about trying to keep people involved, be really clear about what we're trying to do, give them the education and support to achieve what I'm asking, and trusting them to execute against kind of the vision and things that I'm talking about.
Okay, I think we have a question from our guest. Yes?
Hi, my name is Ilya. I'm chief software architect. So my question next: what you can evaluate as a good metrics for divide bad quality of DevOps from good quality of DevOps? Thanks.
Cool. So metrics, I'm going to recommend again Accelerate as a book to read. We track the 4 key ones around stability and throughput. So we're looking at the mean time from commit to release, so how long does it take us to get out and how much change do we push? So number of releases or deployments. Then we look at the stability on the other side. So how many incidents and what's our mean time to recover? So it's sort of like, how fast are we pushing stuff in here and what's the impact on prod when we do? And then there are some pretty aggressive targets around what good looks like. So for us, we're targeting 45 minutes from commit to prod. We're targeting 30 minutes for a mean time to recover. So, and then volume, obviously the incident count we want as low as possible and the release count we want as high as possible. Yeah, we track across kind of those measures, and I think those are pretty common in the DevOps realm. But again, Accelerate is a great book to read, or you could just Google 4 key metrics for DevOps, and it'll give you a bunch of articles of people measuring similar things. Yeah.
Thanks, Katrina. I remember that we are in a tough schedule, so it's time to go to sleep to us and time to go to work for you. I don't know which is better. So I would say thank you very much. It was really
I think yours is better.
Yes, it was really fun interview. I would say the funniest interview we ever run. Great talk. I would also say great thanks to our location sponsor, the Creative States, which give us opportunity to stay here and to run an interview with you. Good luck with your leadership, I would say. It's pretty hard way.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Katrina, for your openness, for your inspiration, for being a good example of a great leader. So thank you very much for the interview, for the open, good answers. I appreciate that. I enjoyed this interview. Thank you very much, and have a very productive day.
Yeah, it was really good and interesting and very honest interview. I guess everyone here in the studio and everyone who watches us knows something new and now have one more example to follow. Thank you.
Great.
Cool.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet you all.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.